Yo, Carl, open the door.
Damn it.
I got a gift for you.
Go away, go away. So tired of this. Friggin' go away, you freak.
Carl, did you do something behind the
Yeah, I
couch?
did. I lost peace and quiet. What do you need? What do you want? Can I not just live here without having to occasionally deal with you animals?
Ta-da! Good evening, everybody. This is Mr. Patriarch, joined tonight by Auron MacIntyre. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's theme for the stream is millennial culture. So I just figured I'd start it off with a little juicy bit of millennial deep lore from my younger years. I don't know why, but I had just stumbled across Aqua Teen Hunger Force by accident on the internet. And I was like, oh man, it's been many moons. And then so I found that clip and endlessly laughed about it. So anyways, yeah, I just figured I'd get used to the new share video file tool on Streamlabs as well. So if you are new here, thanks for coming. My name again is Mr. Patriarch. I'm joined by Auron MacIntyre. We do lots of, I would say, sort of tangentially sort of related content. He does a lot of things maybe from more of a neo-reactionary perspective. I guess, you could consider me sort of NRx adjacent. Yeah, basically, I was in the middle of doing a relatively heavy video, and I just thought, you know what, I just want to do something fun and apolitical for a change, just for once. So I reached out to Auron and my fellow millennial and figured we'd talk about just stuff. So first off, Auron, do you have anything you want to shill at the beginning before we get started?
Yeah, just the channel. If anybody wants to head that way, it's the same name, but that's about it.
Awesome. Yes. And I've looked for all of Auron's socials and posted them below in the show notes. You can also, if you want to support the channel, Mr. Patriarch, you can also find a subscribe star link down below as well. That'll help me buy nappies and diapers and all that sort of stuff. Nappies or diapers, depending on your continent of origin. Now, so first off, let's begin. Very briefly, there was some concern on Twitter from a person named Saffron that this was going to be some sort of highfalutin generational theory wankery. I assure you it's going to be nothing of the sort. But I guess to sort of address that real quick, what do you sort of roughly make of generational theory as a whole? Auron, do you hold any credence to it, or do you think it's just, again, nothing much to it?
I get to happily say that outside of knowing that it exists and AA was talking about it, I know nothing about it. So I'm assuming it has something to do with people of a particular generation having a particular, zeitgeist or whatever. And of course, that's true. Like if you grow up in the same environment, have the same influences, then there will be a particular way, I guess, you see the world or you approach the world. But outside of that, I have no idea what the theory is.
Yeah, I haven't really looked much into it myself. As far as I understand it, a lot of the talk on this in our circles is related to the Fourth Turning book, which I have not read, so I'm not going to comment too much on that. But I think it's I think there's certainly generations, right? So I'm not going to say, everyone's an individual or anything like that. That's stupid. People are clearly a product of both time and place. And that, has some bearing on how people turn out, millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and so forth. Now, of course, you'll have exceptions to this for any number of reasons, right? So, I mean, if you grew up in a small, red, rural state and were homeschooled and went to church, you're going to probably turn out to be a much different person than someone who was like born and raised in some liberal enclave in San Francisco. Nevertheless, you're both of the same generation, but widely different outcomes. So I guess kind of moving forward, now that's all the all the theory talk out
Yeah,
of the
now
way.
that we've tackled the academic portion of today's.
Yeah. Now let's talk about. So first off, Auron, what would you classify as, I guess, a millennial, roughly speaking?
I mean, I've seen a lot out there. I guess I am definitely on the older edge of the millennials. I'm just barely a millennial by most standards, it depends. I'm in the back half of my 30s.
Right.
So I think I sneak in there, but not by a lot. So a lot of this stuff, might have been like things I enjoyed in college while other people were enjoying them in high school, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's odd. Like ever since I moved down to South Africa, like all my buddies have been kind of in that age bracket, by and large, like 35 plus. I don't know. But the sort of elderly millennials. I myself am, I guess you would say, a middle-aged millennial. I was born in the early 90s. And so yeah, for me, like I have early childhood memories of the 90s. Specifically the latter half of the 90s. And I remember, but transitioning to the 2000s, and that was a big deal because, when you were a kid and you like video games and whatnot, you sort of judge epochs of your life based on kind of what generation of console was out in a given year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was like, oh, these were my N64 years. Oh, these were my my GameCube years. Oh, this is my 360 year.
Yeah, it's interesting because we might be the first, and as Bugman as this is to say, there's just no way around it. We might be the first generation to like primarily identify their adolescence with video games. Like they existed obviously in like the late 70s, early 80s. But really, millennials are probably the first one to have so much of their youth and identity tied up in that specific thing.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. And I mean, I'm also probably the last part of the last age cohort where I remember, in my early years being young enough to where, like we didn't have internet for one thing. And that might have been partially because I was in a, kind of a small rural state. But I mean, didn't have internet. A lot of people I know didn't have internet when I was a little kid. And I remember my parents getting their first cell phone. And it was like this big clunky, it was one of those bricks. And, no screen even. I don't recall. I think it was just like, it was like one of those 80s drug dealer car phones, essentially, is what it looked like.
Yeah, I can one better you on that one. I remember when like nobody had a computer, and so like the school would send you home. They had an Apple II in a case.
Oh, nice.
And like every weekend someone would get to take the Apple II home and set it up at their house. And so, like, if it was your weekend, you got to go home and play Oregon Trail all weekend because you had the Apple II. So, yeah, I can certainly remember a time when online was just not an option.
Definitely. I remember when I was in elementary school, we had a lot of hand-me-downs, I guess, from the older millennials. And one of the things that we had was, like you were saying, this sort of Apple II computers with the floppy disk games and whatnot, with the Oregon Trail and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's amazing just sort of how quickly it seems this sort of stuff changes. And particularly back then, it seemed like there was so much, in a certain sense, I feel like there was more kind of, if you sort of look at pop cultural stuff in terms of, like, let's just take video games as an example. There was a lot more change in a short period of time with video games, I feel. So like if you compare like a gaming system from 1997 to 2007, that's a much bigger leap than from 2007 to 2017, just in terms of technical aspect. So.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So I guess let's now that we've got sort of the reminiscent musings aside on sort of the generational aspect of it, let's talk about sort of the good bits of millennial culture. So first off, TV. So we'll tackle some of the good stuff, and then we'll go back later to the bad stuff. So first off, good stuff for me as far as TV goes. I actually didn't really watch that much TV growing up. Again, was mostly because I kind of lived out in the woods. But I do recall having we had antenna TV for quite some time when I was younger, and I remember, and this was in like I guess the late 90s. One of the things is I'd come back from school, get dropped off, and on Fox, they had Fox 4 Kids, where, where they'd play cartoons right after school. So it was dynamite. So I'd get done with school and get home at about, I guess, like 3:30 or something. And there'd be like I remember specifically a lot of old Marvel cartoons. So X-Men, Spider-Man. They would also integrate other stuff too. Like I remember there was some I'm racking my brain trying to remember those. I think there was this one called like Big Guy and Rusty about like this robot, and Digimon also came out around that same time as well. And it's, that to me was sort of my TV consumption when I was younger. So as far as my early childhood stuff goes, it would be things like that, Marvel cartoons after school. And then in the mornings before that on UPN Channel 5, which later became the CW, I would watch Pokemon at 7:30. And that was like the carrot my mom dangled to get us out of bed a bit earlier. She'd be like, boys, you're going to miss out on Pokemon if you don't wake up. And I'm like, oh shit, I gotta, what are they going to find today? So that was kind of my draw to get me up early in the morning. But that would sort of make up my early childhood TV consumption. What about you?
Let's see. Early, it would have been Transformers and G.I. Joe, back when they could just make toy commercials, TV shows.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt, but do you remember Extreme Dinosaurs?
I don't know that I remember that one. No.
Okay. But yeah, it was a similar sort of toy cartoon show.
No, they had you had all your stuff on Nickelodeon that was like classics. You had like Inspector Gadgets and that kind of stuff. And then when I get a little older, definitely the X-Men. I first learned about X-Men, and Spider-Man through the TV shows really. Before I read a bunch of comic books, and then of course the excellent Batman animated series.
Yeah, that was great.
That was definitely a big one that I watched a ton of when I was a kid. I'm trying to think of other cartoons that I was really into.
I see Indie Defense you're mentioning Recess. Honorable mention. That's a great one.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent one. No, that one holds up a little bit if you go back.
It does, yeah.
Someone made a point to me that Community, the show Community, is just a ripoff of Recess. And if you go back, that's 100% correct. They totally just picked up all the characters from Recess and dropped them in Community College. Power Rangers, a lot of Power Rangers. And Voltron. Anything where robots came together was pretty big deal. Macross, because that's what they called Robotech or whatever when they came over.
You gotta love these American rebrandings of Japanese franchises.
Yeah. They would just take them and just cut them up, and double with something entirely different. Just completely alter the plots, or if I remember correctly, like Power Rangers was literally like footage from a different show of fighting that they like cut American scenes with and then just swapped in the fighting scenes from another Japanese show. DuckTales. Yeah, there you go, man. There you go. That's a good pull. Yeah. DuckTales. And what's the Chippendale Rescue Rangers?
Oh yeah. Yes. Tailspin.
Yeah. Yep. Tailspin. Yeah. Darkwing Duck. Yeah, those are all. Yep,
Yes.
those are all in there.
Yes. No, that was great. Yeah, I remember. I remember too. It seemed like a lot of the primetime stuff was on Channel 4, Fox, after school for when I was younger. But on UPN Channel 5 in the morning, again before school, you had some new stuff, but also quite a mix of older stuff as well. So you had, I remember the RoboCop cartoon would come on for that one.
remember when they used to make toys and cartoons of rated R movies for kids?
Yeah.
Here's this Terminator action figure, or this RoboCop action figure for a 5-year-old.
Yeah. No, I remember, the RoboCop cartoon, and I'm trying to think of other UPN ones. Yeah, also at that time was In Recess, which was mentioned before. Gosh, I'm racking my brain. I don't think in that time slot, at least where I was, they'd play other shows. So on Channel 13, they would play on Saturdays. They'd play other cartoons. So like that's, I think, where you'd find like Doug and like Pepper Ann and the Wild Thornberries and stuff like that. At least for me.
Well, there was that weird. So I was at that moment when Disney Channel was something you paid for, right? And like once every quarter, there was the free Disney Channel weekend. And so it's like a big deal. It's like, ooh, free Disney Channel weekend. Like you got to figure out what you want to watch. And so, we get to glimpse behind the velvet curtain and see how the rich people watched their children's television. And then like eventually got rolled into cable packages. So some of those Disney cartoons, but yeah, the Nickelodeon ones were clear. Like, yeah, Hey Arnold, Ren and Stimpy, the Rocko's Modern Life. Those were all like wildly subversive stuff that should have never been. So Nickelodeon hasn't changed for those who are wondering. Like,
I was just thinking about your that Pride Parade one. They've been at this shit for years.
Yeah. No, we did not escape that. We just, our parents were had at least had an excuse for not understanding that we were getting subverted. I guess at least a better excuse.
Yeah.
Mutant Ninja Turtles. Absolutely, man. You're right. Sorry, that one.
Oh yeah.
It's like, somebody has to mention Ninja Turtles. Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. That was. I do not believe that was on air when I was. It actually might have been. I don't recall. I don't remember watching it when I was a little bit older, but I do remember getting the tapes of it at the Blockbuster.
I was obsessed. My friends had every action figure and all the big video games. The Turtles, Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. If you haven't sunk at least an afternoon into 4-player Ninja Turtles in a stand-up arcade, then I don't know what happened to your childhood as a millennial, but you did it wrong.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember doing that at Chuck E. Cheese.
Yep.
In Anchorage, yeah. So this guy says, did you guys have Saturday morning cartoons in the U.S.? Yes, on terrestrial television, the place to watch Saturday morning cartoons, for me anyways, was on Channel 13 ABC on the weekends. That's where I'd sort of consume my cartoons on the weekends, would be on ABC. But we didn't actually have cable or anything. I remember when I was a kid, it was always a treat to spend the weekend over by my grandfolks because they did have cable, which meant they had Cartoon Network and Boomerang. And I remember a lot of, in that time period, because I believe Cartoon Network actually started when I was like a young kid.
Yeah, it came out when I want to feel like I was like 7 or 8. It was when it really got going.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff that they had then was I think when they started out, Cartoon Network had a lot of older cartoons, but then they transitioned to trying to make more unique, original sort of content instead of recycling old Hanna-Barbera stuff, essentially. What I think they ended up doing is all the old Hanna-Barbera sort of Scooby-Doo-esque cartoons and went over to Boomerang, but then Cartoon Network would be sort of newer material. So I remember one thing that they had on Cartoon Network where I believe a lot of future shows would sort of take off was called it was a show called What a Cartoon. And with that one, it would be like a new cartoon every episode. So it was unserialized. It was sort of like an anthology show, or I guess no, more of a variety show. And like I said, each one would be different. And you had some really weird ones that went nowhere, but then you also had some other ones which premiered on What a Cartoon, which became big shows in their own right, like Johnny Bravo.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that got started there. I also believe Ed, Edd n Eddy might have started there as well. Incidentally, I also think that Ed, Edd n Eddy was the last traditionally animated cartoon in the United States. After that, they started using certain CG techniques. So it would be animated. So it wouldn't be like 3D, Toy Story style animation, but they would sort of use computers to kind of render the animation. But Ed, Edd n Eddy, I think, was the last one that was sort of traditionally animated. But yeah, a lot of those, there was a lot of weird cartoons on early Cartoon Network as well, like freaking Cow and Chicken. Like,
Oh yeah.
I remember watching that as a kid and just thinking, like, what the hell is this?
Well, and they also did
weird
things like
show.
Space Ghost Coast to Coast,
Yeah.
So
No, definitely. And I guess that would be sort of transitioning to sort of as I got older, the shows that sort of appeal to you, naturally change. And one of the ones that I showed was Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which was early on in this video. Now, Aqua Teen was, again, it was one of those things, we didn't have TV, but like my brother and I, we'd always stay up late to watch Adult Swim when we were at my grandma's. And that was always one of our favorite indulgences was watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force. There was also some other shows that I got into a bit later, kind of after they had premiered on TV, like Firefly. That was a big one that I actually liked quite a bit. I remember a friend of mine, I think it was in high school, he tuned me on. And I actually watched Serenity first before watching Firefly. And it was my buddy was trying to redeem himself because he had made a movie suggestion a while ago. And then we watched like half of it and we're like, dude, this is terrible. And so we didn't watch it. And he's like, all right, guys, no, you're going to like this one. I promise. Like, let's watch Serenity. This is a good movie. And I'm like, okay, Marcus, if you say so. And then we did. And then I was like, man, damn, this is pretty good. And you said it's based on a TV show. And then I watched the TV show after that.
yeah, I became the Firefly apologist in like my group. Like I went around spreading the good word. And so, I love that show a lot. I've seen every episode, dozens of times. I remember like every time someone would be like, yeah, I saw this movie Serenity. I really liked it. I wish, someone there'd been more of that. I'm like, oh buddy, I have such great news for you. So that was definitely a huge one, for me. I see someone saying Stargate SG-1. Yes, that is another excellent. Definitely. Though that one, it's weird because my mother, who doesn't like sci-fi and never once in her life ever watched a sci-fi show, decided that she liked Star Trek: The Next Generation, like out of nowhere, and started watching that when I was a kid. And so I totally blame any nerddom I have on her because like that became like something I was obsessed with when I was like 7. And then just went from that to Stargate, and from Stargate to like Firefly and the like. So,
Yeah, it's all your fault, Mom.
Mhm.
Basically. Yeah. Now, speaking of other sort of TV shows, wrapping up here, I guess. But I remember Voyager was also quite good for the time.
Yeah, it does not hold up well, but I liked looking at Jerry Ryan, so so that was good.
Was that 7 of 9?
Yes,
If I
yeah,
remember correct.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
We
me
put
too.
her in we've put her in a bodysuit. Why? You know why?
Why not?
Right. That's a quality piece of casting there, guys. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
quality casting. Yeah.
What if?
Now,
What if? Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, yeah. So I definitely watched Voyager. Not for the plot so much, but
Indeed. Now, moving on to music. So, when you think millennial music, what do you think, Auron?
definitely you think of like kind of the new metal, rap metal type stuff that because I was young when like grunge and kind of like Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden and all that stuff. So I kind of heard all that stuff a little later. Like Green Day was kind of was big when I was in like elementary school, so I kind of heard some of that. And then you really had like kind of the new metal wave. So everybody decided to add an extra string to their guitar and put a DJ in their rock band for some reason.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a cultural artifact, new metal. It has not propelled itself into the future. No, I would agree with that. I think the one of the first records I actually remember listening to when I was young was actually a blues album. It was called "Some Rainy Morning" by Robert Cray, which was still an excellent blues record. But as far as like hip music at the time, I remember a lot of like. It seems to me that what was popular a lot more was more rock music, essentially. Like rock music was significantly more popular back then than it is now.
It was
in all of its forms.
It was the last gasp of popular rock music dominating this year.
Yeah.
Like rap, was something that was, gaining a foothold when I was a kid. Like Vanilla Ice showed up in my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, go ninja, go. MC Hammer had a children's cartoon because the 90s was an interesting time. But like it really had not dominated. And then like the radio kind of became a mix of half rap and half rock. But that was really the new metal was kind of the last time it seemed to really be fighting, the kind of the hip hop takeover of pop music.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Like, and there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, it's straight up pop, but it's, done with rock and roll instrumentals. So bands like even Sugar Ray or whatever, or what other bands? Speaking of another sort of like 90s holdover that didn't really continue on is like ska music.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh,
like
yeah.
upstroke guitars and the trumpets and stuff.
Literally the only reason I knew ska existed was Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah. Yes. I remember.
That's it.
Yeah, I remember years later, like I was on I was farting around on YouTube, I think in high school or whatever. And I somehow came across like Real Big Fish or something by happenstance, the ska band, for anyone paying attention or anyone interested. And I remember like laughing. I'm like, oh my God, like I haven't heard this since I was like 10 years old or whatever. Again, playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater and stuff. And then I just sort of went on like a ska binge after that. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, that's something you definitely don't see much of anymore. So yeah. And not only ska was one of those things of its time, but also so was new metal, like you say. And also pop punk. Pop punk used to be huge. Bands like Blink 182, even The Offspring, tons of bands.
MXPX, like all those
MXPX,
bands,
Sum 41, like those bands used to be ginormous. And, there's that type of sound with the punk energy, with the pop sensibilities and the melodic, vocals and whatever. That sort of thing's basically gone the way of the dodo.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I don't know. I listened to a lot of like classic rock when I was a kid, so I was listening to The Who and Led Zeppelin and like Jimi Hendrix and Lynyrd Skynyrd, and then I would also listen to like like Seven Dust and Linkin Park. I actually still have the Seven Dust drumstick from a concert. I didn't listen to a lot of the pop punk. I eventually went back to like today when I listen to metal or rock, I listen to basically like 80s metal. That's the stuff that I think held up much better in the long term. It's stuff a lot of people would have made fun of back when I was, a kid, but I think that held up much better for me than a lot of the stuff today. Though I did throw on like a 2000s rock playlist on the way home from work today, just so I could be ready for this.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now that's another thing that was sort of, and I guess sort of younger people wouldn't be aware of this, you Zoomers out there. But the early to late 2000s, so I guess from maybe from about 2000 to about 2010 was actually really an interesting kind of high watermark for American metal, or metal internationally, I would say, in terms of what they were doing with the genre. Like you had tons of bands putting out excellent records at that time period, like Mastodon. A lot of metalcore bands were sort of that was when they were really popular, was in that time period too. Bands like Between the Buried in Me, As I Lay Dying. There's tons of great bands. I'm trying to think of another one that was Lamb of God, Gojira, all these bands which were really big in the metal scene. They really put out a lot of their best work and kind of hit the, they got on everyone's radar at this time. Now, a lot of these bands had started in the earlier, in the late 90s or mid 90s, but that was sort of the period when they really took off. And some of my favorite bands and records to this day are from that sort of era of metal music, particularly in the United States. So you have some good stuff coming out internationally as well, but in terms of American metal creativity and quality, I think that was actually a surprisingly good time for a lot of metal bands.
I see Creed in the chat over there with like a sarcasm, but let's be real. You all liked Creed at some point, okay? They're
the band you left to hate, but they weren't that bad.
It's not Nickelback, okay? Like it's not Nickelback. Like it doesn't always age well, but everybody liked Creed. Like let's just be honest.
And even Nickelback wasn't Nickelback.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember one of my friends in I think it was in high school, but he was talking about Nickelback, and he's like, I want you to hear this song. And he put on like one of their sort of B-side tracks that wasn't like on the radio or whatever. And he's like, is this a bad song to you? And I'm like, no, it's really not. This isn't that bad. And he's like, yeah, I know. Like everyone just likes to shit on this band.
Yeah.
And but I remember in high school was when I actually started playing in a lot of local bands and stuff. And I remember, and even in my small town, like there was tons of energy for this sort of, metalcore particularly was huge. Like everyone was starting a band. But our band was sort of, it was kind of, it was a little bit different. We were sort of more thrash metal, I guess. So stylistically more like Metallica or something. Mm-hmm. But so we didn't do like screamed vocals or whatever, but good. Yeah, I I just, I just remember there was tons and tons of bands that were doing that kind of thing at that particular time in the late 2000s and mid to late 2000s. It was everywhere in my circle.
As someone who's officially like, I can now like just be an old man. Like when people started screaming constantly instead of singing, that's when I kind of bailed out of metal. Like, don't get me wrong, like Rob Halford getting a shriek in there every once in a while is good, but when the whole thing is nothing but screaming the entire time, it's like, nope, I'm good. I'm moving on.
I'm out.
I am officially too old to get off my lawn. Like, no.
Yeah. And that was the thing I remember, because I actually wasn't that much into metal at the time. And this was around, I don't know, 2007. And then what happened is there was a concert that was coming to our state, which was a rare thing. And all my buddies were really excited, and it was Megadeth. And Megadeth was coming to the, the Egan Center in Anchorage. And they're like, Dylan, you need to go. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I ended up listening to a bunch of the records. And I'm like, this is actually pretty good. I'm like, and I like Metallica.
Yeah.
And so, and then when we ended up starting a band, they were like, hey, we want you to join, play bass or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but like, it's not going to be metalcore, is it? Because like I draw the line at like thrash metal. And like, no, it's okay. I'm like, all right, sweet. Cool. But, yeah, it took me a while to get over that too. And like, I do like sort of more extreme types of metal, but people who don't like it, I totally understand why. So I guess sort of moving on to good bits of millennial culture, games. Now, I am of the firm opinion that probably the high watermark in terms of games was probably in sort of our age range. There was just so many great games. Like I was going down the list of great games that came out in like 1998. Just 1998, and there are so many classic titles that came out that year alone. I mean, there was 1998. There was Ocarina of Time. There was StarCraft. I believe. Come on. There was a ton of games that came out that year. Age of Empires, Rise of Rome came out that year. Tons and tons and tons of stuff, and the variation sort of, I guess, when we were sort of younger was there was quite a bit in terms of the change that we saw. So like when I was young, I remember I went over to my friend's house, and it was right before it was shortly before the Nintendo 64 came out, and he had a Super NES, and that was, a modern system at the time, Super NES. And then by the time I'm in high school, I guess we're sort of getting to, when did the 360 come out? Was that like 2006 or something?
It's got to be earlier than that.
The 360.
I think it's got to be earlier than that.
It might be 2005 or something. Here, let me Google it real quick.
I want to say it's like 2004, 2005.
Let's find out. Do the Google foo here.
Because I remember having to play Halo 1 on LANs. Like one of the amazing things about going to college was there was a T1 line where you could like play reliably like Halo on original Xbox, like over the LAN.
Now, I know that the original Xbox, I think, came out in like 2001 or 2002. But I think I'm looking here. It says the 360 came out in 2005. Okay. So, but yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is the change in terms of system quality or graphics fidelity or whatever you want to call it really made a big change in like, the matter of 10 years. I mean, if you think about the difference between like a 2005 system, the Xbox 360, and you compare it to 1995, which was the year before the Nintendo 64 came out. I mean, so you're going in a decade, you're going from SNES to an Xbox 360. That's, that's light years.
yeah,
it seems now there's like diminishing returns with technology.
Yeah, I mean, I remember getting an NES, and so I went, going from the NES to the 360, from my childhood to early adulthood is definitely a massive change.
Yeah. Now, what were some of your favorite games, I guess, in various genres, from sort of like young to from when you were a small kid to sort of young adulthood?
Well, we definitely, obviously like the Marios, because NES was like the only thing out. And then Double Dragon 2. When I was in like second or third grade, every day we'd get home from school and we would beat Double Dragon 2. Like that's what we did every single day.
Nice.
The Mega Man's, Castlevania, and then you had the SNES and Sega came out. So then you had Sonic. I didn't actually own either of those systems, so I never got into the RPGs, like Zelda and stuff that other people had. I played Zelda on the original NES, but it just didn't grab me. So it wasn't really until the PlayStation that I really got into RPGs at all. But when I did, I definitely played, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 10. Were all huge. Halo, Fallout, when that made the leap to the next gen, Fallout 3 and New Vegas. And then eventually BioShock was probably like the game that was, between Fallout, New Vegas, and BioShock, kind of battling for my favorite games of all time.
I have never played the original BioShock or New Vegas.
All right, sorry, I got to leave. It's been great. Thanks for having me. Like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, no.
I haven't, and I know they're good games. Like everyone tells me they're great, but I don't know why. I just never played them. Like I remember in university, my buddy got BioShock Infinite, and I watched him play that. And yeah, it seemed like a cool game, but
Infinite's fine, but original BioShock is totally, it's not even, it's
a masterpiece.
Yeah, absolutely. Once, by the time you got to Infinite's fun. I still enjoyed it. But it's just Ken Levine being like, America bad, like for, 30 hours. And don't get me wrong, like BioShock is him saying Ayn Rand is bad, but at least he's kind of right about that.
Yeah.
Though the funny thing about BioShock is it probably subverts his attempt at subversion as often as it succeeds in its actual subversion. I think there's a lot of stuff that he kind of accidentally leaves in there that or doesn't understand. As so is often the case with art. Often it tells too much truth more than the people who made it meant for it to. But yeah, those are definitely my video games.
That's nice. Yeah, with me, like I remember earliest games I remember playing. I remember my dad had like an old Atari and like Pac-Man. But as far as like contemporary games, I remember my buddy, his name was Tyler. He had I didn't have any game systems, but he had a SNES, and I remember playing the crap out of Super Mario Bros. All-Stars at his place. That was my favorite, and I loved playing specifically Super Mario Bros. 3. That was awesome. Yeah, because it was like, I think it was the first one with kind of like a world map. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. Did you see, I think it's the Wizard, that movie?
The Wizard.
So
The Wizard.
I think it's called The Wizard, and it's a movie with Frank Savage from the Wonder Years, and his brother is a literal autist, and the only thing he's good at is playing video games, and so he has to travel with his brother on like an adventure to get him to this video game championship. And when they get there, the whole thing to like win the thing is like getting the highest score on this brand new game they're revealing at the championship, which is Mario Brothers 3. It was literally an entire movie that was just a giant commercial for Mario Brothers 3. That's how big that game was.
Yeah, no, it was a great game. It was a great game. I still occasionally play it, but yeah, for me, what really kind of that was when I first really liked the game was Super Mario Bros. 3, and and also Donkey Kong Country at the same time. Fantastic game, older platformers, but yeah, I remember also what was it? What really started blowing me away was when the N64 came out, and just the sheer amount of games there that were really good, which I really enjoyed. Probably first and foremost, as far as games that came out on that generation of console, which I really liked, was Star Fox. I love Star Fox 64. That one was really good. Also, of course, Mario Kart 64 for destroying friendships and yelling at each other. It was so great. I'd always love it when you'd be way ahead and then some guy gets the purple shell and it just blows you out of first place. Like the balancing on the items was maybe not the best, but it was a fun game. And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. No problem, man. I was just going to rattle off the list. Also, what was that once? That was a Star Wars game, Shadow of the Empire.
Mm-hmm. And Rogue Squadron, both were on N64.
Yes, Shadow of the Empire, Rogue Squadron, both those games, loved them. And Ocarina of Time, of course. I also really liked Turok quite a bit. Did you ever play that?
No, I played GoldenEye and Perfect Dark.
Yeah, those excellent choices.
Yeah, well, see, so I went from NES, and then my parents refused to buy another game console because there were still games out for the NES, and they're like, "Why would you need another console? You don't own all the games." Literally made no sense to them. Like, why would we purchase another video game system? There's like infinite games for the ones you have that you don't own, so just buy those. And then like when I got to like my early 10 or 11 or whatever, like the N64, the PlayStation 1, and the Sega Saturn were all like in their waning life cycles, so they were all offering like package deals with theirs. And they're like, okay, you can pick one of these. And like a genius, I was like, well, the Sega Saturn comes with 3 games, and the other ones come with 2 games. So I picked the Sega Saturn. So while everybody else was playing like Mario Kart and Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, I'm like, I've got Panzer Dragoon, which is a great game.
I was going to say you're playing Panzer Dragoon.
Yeah, which was a really good game, but like, yeah, I kind of had to play all of those games secondhand with friends. So I know, I played Star Fox, I played Rogue Squadron, I played a little bit of Mario 64, but I never really got deep into those games. I mainly played the multiplayers because I played those with my friends, the shooters and all that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, as far as like, now of course later on when you have the console transition, you had GameCube and Xbox come out, and as far as I'm not as I didn't. I mean, I liked those. There are plenty of games on those that I did enjoy, but the ones, I guess the list of memorable ones is a little bit shorter. So the ones I really liked there were like Super Smash Bros. Melee. What else? I was one of the few people who really liked Star Fox Adventures, unironically. That was fun. And what else? Yeah, Super Smash Bros. Melee. Star Wars Battlefront. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And Halo 2. Those were fun. Halo 3. Yeah, all those were great. But the games that I actually really liked quite a bit, which have gone down in terms of popularity a lot as a genre, were real-time strategy games. So I play those on my Compaq 98. Mm-hmm. And those ones that I played a lot were Age of Empires 2 and StarCraft. And I still play those games. like I never grew out of those games. Like other games came in the future and I just kind of ignored them just to play StarCraft and AoE essentially.
Yeah, let's gather all the kids around, and Grandpa's going to tell you guys a story. So I remember playing Warcraft 2, not World of Warcraft.
Oh yeah,
Warcraft 2 on my 36K dial-up modem, and I'd have to ask my mom to like stop trying to call people because nobody had a dedicated internet line. Like you just use your phone line, so you couldn't be on the phone and online at the same time. That was like, voodoo for rich people. And so I had to like find a time where mom wasn't going to call anybody for like 2 hours so we could complete a match of StarCraft or Warcraft 2. So yeah, I definitely was obsessed with the real-time strategy games.
Yeah, that was actually my first introduction to real-time strategy games. I went over to my buddy's house and he was playing Warcraft 2, and I was like, dude, what is this? Like you're controlling an army and like building a base? And he's like, yeah. And these are orcs. And I'm like, what? No way. So yeah, that was kind of my first taste of RTS, and I've never gotten over it since. So yeah, and as far as like games later on, your aforementioned beloved BioShock and New Vegas. Yes, I guess I'll have to check those out. Like I keep hearing great things about them, so maybe it's time to finally, just do what everyone did, like whatever 12 years ago, and play those games.
Well, BioShock's probably ruined for you now, but it's still worth it for the experience. But you should definitely play Fallout New Vegas, because especially you can pick that up with all the DLC for nickels, and that game is just fantastic. I mean, you probably don't have time anymore, but I certainly played a lot when I had time.
Definitely. So let us continue. So those are sort of good aspects of millennial culture. So there was a lot of good TV shows. There's a lot of good music. There's a lot of good games. Some of the music has sort of come and gone, but I maintain that in terms of metal and rock music, there was a lot of, like, in the 90s you had grunge, and in the 2000s you had sort of new wave of American heavy metal. So a lot of great stuff there. Now let's talk about the bad parts of millennial culture. So you want to hit cultural subversion, Auron. So how were they trying to brainwash us back in the day?
I mean, how weren't they, right? Like you said, you go back and you look at cartoons that made it onto Nickelodeon, and you're like, wow, that's all wildly inappropriate and subversive for children, for sure. Obviously, MTV became a big influence at the time. It didn't seem like a big deal with the music videos, but eventually pretty much every program on there just became like infinite trash. People forget, but MTV is what brought us the reality television show. Like Real World was, I think, the first, like, just watch drunk idiots be awful to each other as entertainment.
And of course, along that lines, you also had Jerry Springer and Ricky Lake.
And like I said, you had a lot of selling super violent movies to children, which I thought was extremely cool at the time, but now that I'm older, I realize how bad that is. You also had things like The Simpsons, which of course now is just sad, but at the time, it was a lot of 6 and 7 year olds watching that kind of thing, and parents thinking it was fine because nobody had this idea that animated stuff could be for adults. There's no concept of that. Cartoons were for children. So it's fine to let your kid watch whatever came on a cartoon because that they're for kids. And so there was certainly quite a bit of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one thing that, because a lot of millennial culture was actually made by Gen Xers. particularly a lot of the cooler, edgier stuff, right? And I think millennials get pegged as sort of the stereotype is that millennials are very sincere and all this sort of stuff, and that may or may not be true. But what I remember a lot of was a lot of cynical, kind of, just a lot of cynical sort of, you don't get it sort of content coming out, targeted mostly at millennials. So like if you think about like shows like South Park, or later on show things like what was it? I'm trying to think, like the Colbert Report, or
Oh yeah, we should talk about the Daily Show for sure.
Yeah. I mean that whole thing in terms of cultural subversion, the whole angle on those sort of shows, despite this whole shtick of like millennial sincerity, seemed to be like cynicism and sort of unearned elitism a little bit, sort of like, hey, this is all bullshit. You're smarter than the rest of the people. You get what's going on. Like, we're just going to make a joke out of everything and can't take anything seriously. And sincerity is, lame and blah, blah, blah. So that seemed to be actually a strong component actually of sort of later millennial culture, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't have very many memories of the 80s, but yeah, we still had the early in or I guess in my early childhood, being like 9 or 10, most media was reacting to the 80s and the Reagan era, and so you had pretty much every single thing was trying to be snarky towards the religious right and conservative America and Reagan and all that stuff. And I certainly feel different about Reagan now than I did then. But the point is that was, it was all, everything was a reaction to this time in the 80s where there was this brief moment of like, it wasn't that things were getting super conservative. They weren't but comparatively it looked that way. It's kind of like culture pumped the brakes for a few years. And everybody acted like it meant that, basically, the Christian church had recaptured all of culture. And so when the 90s came in, it was all cynicism. It was all snark. It was all, looking at this stuff and trying to subvert it or trying to make it look ridiculous. And so I think you're right. I think that pretty much all of the humor encoded even to most children's cartoons and programming tended to be with this attitude towards the past. And of course, this is nothing new. This has been happening for a very long time. This is literally what defines the 60s. But you could really see that dynamic kind of running on fumes, because you also had this, we were in the 90s. You had the internet boom, good time financially. And so, and when you really, this is where you get the end of history narrative, right? The Soviet Union's fallen. Yeah, exactly. And so you really have this attitude of like, well, everybody before us was kind of dumb, but we've figured it out now. We're all getting rich buying, pets.com or whatever, and everybody's going to college, and where it's just going to be infinite growth and dropping crime rates from here on out. And so there was definitely that inborn feeling of like, okay, we've kind of solved all of the world's problems, and we don't really need any of that kind of stuff anymore. And so we can just kind of, be snarky and cynical and backhand all this stuff because we've kind of figured it out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's shows like The Daily Show or The Colbert Report kind of typified this, right? And on the other end of it, you also had new atheism sort of getting popular with the millennial generation sort of at the same time. So, you sort of grow up in the 90s. things are sort of good and whatnot. You have the sort of Simpsons or whatever, sort of trashing sort of the American Dad image a little bit. You have South Park, which just sort of lampoons everything. And then you have in the early 2000s shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which sort of kind of like South Park, but Aqua Teen Hunger Force is sort of it does lampoon everything and it doesn't take it seriously, but it's also just sort of like this weird surrealist.
Yeah, no, it's something
nonsensical.
different. It's definitely when you started getting cartoons that just were almost completely disconnected from everything.
Yeah.
I know. I like that show a lot when it came out. Like the Brood Witch episode is always the one that I remember. I haven't watched in a long time, but like, eat the sun-dried tomato. Like, no, I hate them. They're gross.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and then you would, but then coming on sort of from the back of that, going into sort of the mid to late 2000s, you had sort of new atheism come up. So as millennials are getting ready to enter college, they've been sort of primed sort of with the culture sort of stuff to sort of think about anything traditional as sort of a square. And it's all very materialist. It's all very disconnected from tradition. And of course, you don't have like popular ideas like critical race theory or anything at all on the landscape. But what you do have is this sort of kind of self-centered materialism, right? So it's sort of boomerism, but more hostile towards tradition and explicitly hostile towards religion, I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I remember, I went to college as kind of new atheism was taking off, and I would sit in philosophy classes, and it was that you're kind of on the edge where like wokeness hadn't really taken over yet. So you still had people who were happy that there was a conservative in the room, so they could like argue with somebody. And they were like they were still kind of, you were one of like three people, and you were the only one that talked. Everybody else was on the other side, but they were at least happy. Professors still would like kind of pull you out because at least somebody would say something different. So I kind of got out of college right before the woke stuff really started hitting and people got censored. Like I remember getting a couple bad grades on papers because professors just didn't like my position. Like, how could you possibly, but in general, there wasn't this like, shutting you down, struggle session, type mentality, they weren't yet hunting down frat boys on campus and that kind of thing. But you definitely did have the new atheist push. Because I remember sitting in the university bookstore and reading a Sam Harris book and being like, this is what everybody's excited about. Like,
Yeah. No, I remember when I went to university, I went a little bit later than you, but it might have just been, again, because I went to school in my home state. And it was very much, there really wasn't a lot of, wokery outside of the, like sociology department, really. It was very like if you went to a history class or something, you get kind of like standard line stuff. So it wasn't exciting. They weren't reading James Burnham or anything
Cool.
in the college classes. But I do remember, you were allowed to sort of dissent or disagree or whatever. It was just the range of opinions, you would encounter tended to be anodyne. The exception to this, I do remember we had one history professor who was an Asian studies, head of the Asian studies department. And he was kind of eccentric and he'd sort of entertain some crazier ideas. So he was like a big fan of Friedrich List, sort of like the mercantilist German economist guy. And he was also talking about how there's like this Bushido culture in Japan is like responsible for like their imperial expansionism during World War II and stuff. So it was kind of edgy, I guess, in its own sort of way. But that was basically about it. But yeah, I mean, there really was not anywhere near the sort of hostility toward anything normal that you find on American campuses now, even as recent as like 2010, at least where I went to university.
Yeah, I mean, it was every professor was wildly left wing. Like I studied politics, and it was very clear I had maybe 3 professors who had ever voted Republican in their lives. And there were definitely a number of out and out communists. My favorite was the South American studies professor who would come in wearing his Jimmy Carter organization jacket and aviator sunglasses inside nonstop. Though he did refuse to answer any of the female students' questions, so maybe secretly based, but yeah, no, it's one of those scenarios where it was certainly very left wing, but there was still they still had the pretense of, okay, we'll at least let the conservatives talk. We still want someone to voice the opposing opinions. We're still going to run them down if even if they're not given any real, there's no one really selling them or excited about them or pushing them at all.
Yeah, certainly tolerated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that's interesting is that from my childhood to now, a lot of the social issues have just gone totally nuts. And you can see sort of the seeds of it, quite a bit earlier, right in the 60s and whatnot. But like when I was a kid, for example, gay marriage was like nobody supported that. Like even Democrats, by and large, were like, gay marriage, and it was basically a non-issue right up until the Supreme Court decided for everybody that it was the law of the land, essentially. And you had it sort of being approved on a state-by-state basis, of course. But I remember, I think this was even when I was in high school, California had Proposition 8,
Mm-hmm.
where they would it was a referendum on gay marriage in California. And again, I think it was in like 2007 or something, 2007, 2008, and it failed. So California did not vote to legalize gay marriage, but then I believe the California State Supreme Court declared the outcomes of the referendum unconstitutional and just ramrodded it through anyways. But what the actual people wanted when given the chance in California at that time was no gay marriage. And you couldn't imagine such a thing happening today.
Yeah, I think I might be wrong about this, but I think Prop 8 was like specifically banning gay marriage. Like I think I think that was the big, was because they assumed that that the Supreme Court was going to institute it. They actually tried to get it into the Constitution, do a constitutional ban preemptively. I could be wrong about that, but if my memory serves me correctly, that was actually what it was. Because you had guys like the Mozilla Firefox guy get tossed out for having donated to Prop 8.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely ridiculous. Yeah, it's one of those things. If you were far away from the coast, you're like, what? This isn't even on my radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that was sort of my thing. Like I was, again, it might have been just because I was in a far-flung red state, but yeah. But looking here at Proposition 8 in California, that was in 2008, and it was voted on, and the proposition was a ballot proposition in the state and a state constitutional amendment intended to ban same-sex marriage.
Okay, yeah.
And it was passed in 2008. So this legislation passed, and it passed 52% to 47%. And then the Supreme Court just later decided, no, you can't, you know,
Yeah.
you can't amend the Constitution for this purpose.
Are there people out there who still are like on the democracy train? Like, have we not fixed this for people yet? Or I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
No. And that's the thing. Like, there were millions of people who voted for this thing. You know, more than half the state voted for this. You know, but today they would be declared, you know, the worst sort of, you know, bigot. Not even like 13 years later.
well, and you got to remember, like, Barack Obama specifically, he and Hillary Clinton ran against gay marriage. Like they like, it wasn't until like, obviously, like Obama was lying, but like they both like vociferously denied any support for it. And then Joe Biden, of all people, was the wedge, right? Like after Obama got elected, he's like, well, old Joe really changed my mind on that one. And so, you couldn't even be elected president with, you could be the first black president, but you could not support that back during Obama's first term. To say that the things changed overnight would be an understatement.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess sort of moving on in terms of other crazy cultural changes, race. I feel, academic agent sort of mentions this, but he mentions the 90s as sort of the colorblind era. And I think it kind of was to a certain extent. It was about as good as you're going to get in terms of achieving that goal, I think. Racial issues were very downplayed. The racial narrative in America at the time, as I recall it, was, that, hey, it was all about individualism. It was about unity. You'd see shows like, Fresh Prince or whatever, showing sort of, or the Cosby Show,
Family Matters.
Steve Urkel. Family Matters, Married with Kids later on from that. And the whole idea was that, race shouldn't be an important issue. And that was the narrative. Now it's like race is the important issue, essentially. So it's been totally inverted since then. And I think, in terms of thinking of cultural subversion, maybe that was sort of the point. So, you soften them up, you get at least white folks to sort of become deracialized. And then later on, when you need a sort of, when the time is ripe, then you sort of racialize everything again, but they've been sort of trained to be deracialized, I guess. So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't as thought out as all that, but it certainly seems to have worked.
Yeah, you definitely feel like there was an apex there. Like there was a ball that had been thrown up in the air and it hung in the air for a moment in the 90s, and everybody assumed that was the new normal. And then the ball started falling again. We're like, what? Because there really was a detente that I think like the right thought it had reached, where it's like, okay, well, as long as we all agree that we're just going to argue on like who is the more worthy inheritor of Martin Luther King's legacy, then we don't have to answer this anymore. Like we'll get on board with the kind of the melting pot and the multiracial society. We won't talk about race, and then we all just kind of agree to put down our guns back up, and then like slowly different parts of the right start really like, one side put down their guns, the other one just kept firing. And so it was definitely one of those things that but by then kind of the horse was out of the barn, and so that's kind of why so many of your Dave Rubins today are still like, I can't believe that the left is talking about race all the time. Because how am I a Republican now? Because they actually bought into that small window of that narrative, and actually this is pretty much all of the new atheists, right? Like Sam Harris and all these guys are like, I thought I thought this was just going to happen forever. It's like no, it turns out that was not the case.
No, they just want it to be 1998 forever,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. It was a 1-2 switch. And the other thing too is in terms of racialism, I guess deracialism. That was only really ever targeted at the Caucasian population, I guess. I don't think Black Americans ever lost a sense of ethnic identity in the United States, like the broader white population did. But I don't know. It's I'm not going to delve too much into this to avoid getting too spicy. But yeah. So let's continue on. Moving on. Bad bits of millennial culture. So we talked about the cultural subversion. We talked about the new atheism. Now let's talk about in terms of the quality of, I guess, media. Because I do think that the quality of media across the board, be it games, TV shows, movies, has really gone down the crapper. Like it's like the amount of good movies that are worth seeing in a year, or even interesting films. There's just hardly anything. Like I remember, getting excited to go to the cinema. Now I can't even hardly be bothered. I think the degradation we've seen across all kinds, virtually all media spheres or cultural media spheres, is just gone down the toilet within just the past, it feels like just the past 10, 15 years or so. But, and that's not just in terms of the messaging, right? Because that's obvious, like what we're talking about with the racialism, the increasingly insane cultural, socio-cultural views and whatnot. All that's there, but also just in terms of quality, like competence has just gone down the tubes. Like if you like take what's popular now with in terms of music, or the execution in terms of writing for a television show. I mean, it's just nowhere near as good as it used to be. And I don't think that's just the nostalgia talking. I think that's just a fact. What's your take on that?
No, I think that's right. I think one of the things that happened was there was really kind of that apex, and so you had like that moment where like production quality and like giant budgets and like special effects and everything were kind of coming together and producing like the really high quality stuff, while you were still allowed to like say something kind of with pop culture. Don't get me wrong, like a ton of it was still vapid and you could throw it away. But there was you still have things that could, new ideas were still allowed to percolate up, and new themes, and, studios would take risks on people. And it was kind of this perfect moment where you could have kind of a filmmaker have a new idea, be given a giant budget to make it, and have all the tools necessary to really do something interesting with it. And then now we've just moved to this point where like every movie has to make, like $500 billion to, pay back the studio budget. So if it's not Avengers 47, then it just doesn't get greenlit. And obviously like the person doing it has to have about 1 trillion notes from every human being involved. Not to romanticize everything that was made at those time. Again, like there's plenty of garbage. But like I feel like you had you still had a little bit of wiggle room in the risk making department, while having all the benefits of modern budgets, modern effects, modern techniques, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, I would just 100% agree with what you said. Not much to add, but yeah, there was a lot of bad stuff too, in terms of just garbage media back in the day. But you were able to still get excellence cropping up here and there in film or music or whatever. But yeah, now it's pretty dire. And at least in terms of music, there's still quite a bit of good stuff that exists. But the problem is it's all been pushed into the underground. And that's particularly true of, I guess I would say, rock and metal music. So a lot of that stuff, it's still around. And there's still good stuff that's being made, but it's either it just gets zero play in terms of radio play or promotion or anything. So it goes nowhere in terms of affecting the pop culture. It just remains a niche sort of subculture phenomenon, or it's this sort of, or at least in a lot of the rock and metal world, just this weird, just kind of nihilistic wank. Essentially, it's like like in Big Lebowski, we're nihilists. We don't believe in anything like that. That just seems to be the message of a lot of this stuff. It's just extremely like I came across this new band that was really hyped up recently. I think it was called Daughters was the name of the band. And it's just like the most bleak, like needlessly bleak, just sort of just like noise, essentially. And I don't mind noisy songs. I don't mind bleak material, but it's just like track after track after track is just this sort of, it's like a pretentiousness of despair, essentially. So, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well, there are, you're right. Like one of the things that I think it's weird because in one way we have the most monoculture we've ever had because like propaganda is just constant, like it soaks deep into everything. But at the same time, we have the most fractured media ever because everybody can just go and like pull up whatever they want at any time. And so like nobody, it's not like everybody needs to go see the one new movie everybody's talking about, or everybody has to see the one show, or everybody has to listen to the one band because, you can hear anything at any moment as much as you want. You can go watch, Twin Peaks, or you can watch the latest Netflix thing, or you can watch, whatever. And so you don't have that melding together, but there are, Striper is putting out, new records. So if you're looking for, I'm not even joking. Like good new Striper is awesome. If you like metal, like give it a listen. Listen to Fallen and tell me that's a bad record. Also, to go directly from Striper to Judas Priest, Judas Priest's last record was actually extremely good. That's probably their best one since Painkiller. There is good stuff out there, but.
No, definitely. I would agree. And that's interesting what you say. Yeah, it does seem like there is this in terms of the conformists and whatever, right? There is this unavoidable sort of monoculture they want you to adopt. But outside of that, it seems like everything's a subculture, right? There is this fractious everybody's got their own little niche that they sort of like and they have access to now because of the internet, essentially. And I think that is sort of a new phenomenon that, we've sort of seen come about in our lifetimes. Take our sort of circle, for example, right? The sort of channels that we listen to, the sort of things that we think are interesting, the sort of ideas that we think are important. I mean, we think it's cool to us, right? And I think fundamentally it's important, and it's important for everybody. But I mean, the circle of people as a percentage of the population who are interested in the sort of things we're interested in, even, people interested in politics is very small, right? I mean, and I think that's the true of a lot of things, probably, right? So I remember Charlemagne was mentioning earlier about like how ska bands still exist, and I'm sure ska bands do still exist. I remember in
everything still exists.
Yeah. Everything still exists, and I guess
simultaneously.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point. Yeah, it's everything still exists, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that. So
Yeah, I don't buy any new video games. I've got a Nintendo Switch, and when I want to go play a video game, I go back and play like N64 stuff I never played. You know?
Nice.
Like yeah, that's the thing, is like everything is available, you know, like I said, constantly and simultaneously, and so like no new culture ever forms because you know, because everything. Morgoth did a great video on this, if you didn't catch it. But yeah, because like everybody can just go listen to a particular song or video, or go download, you know, a video game from a particular era. Like if you know, you can read you know, Stephen King, or you can go back and read, you know, De Maistre. You know, like you can do it all simultaneously and at your fingertips. And so there's really no reason. And if you want to talk to somebody about it, you can just hunt down a subgroup online to talk about it with. And so there's really no reason to like go and find people in person and interact with them and like share culture with each other, and, you know, be forced to, you know, listen to what people want to listen to or talk about what people want to talk about. And so it's increasingly hard to find that shared experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's sort of one of the downsides, honestly, of the technological progress. On the one hand, it's great because, you know, you get to have access to all these formerly either quashed or unaccessible ideas and books, and meet like-minded people and stuff. And, you know, a lot of my friends in real life too, I particularly since coming down to South Africa, were people I met initially online, people who sort of shared a similar worldview and whatnot. And they're some of my best friends in real life. But I think the downside of that, though, is it does sort of put everyone in this little bubble where they don't feel too comfortable getting outside of it. So what it ends up doing, I think, to a certain extent, is it alienates you from the outside world to a certain extent. And yeah, so I mean, normies are going to normie, but I mean, it's not so bad to to interact with these people sometimes. And it would be better if the normies were, I guess, people that shared you were able to share something with, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're in this weird scenario where like we have to use a medium that we kind of know is inherently bad for people to talk about things that are good for people. So like it is really bad and disastrous that like you can't have a in-person physical culture. You actually want people to like want to read and watch and experience similar things, and then like build identities and you know, cultures and things around them. Like that's a good thing. You don't actually want infinite number of options fracturing people forever. You want limited numbers of options that require people to interact with each other and conform to like good social norms. The problem is like our monoculture is horrific, and like we know that it's
Right.
like it's poisonous. And so while we know that it would be better if we had a relatively homogenous culture inside, you know, tighter knit in-person groups, that is simply unavailable to us in the modern world. And so we are forced to do a thing that we know is like relatively unhealthy, which is build these impersonal social networks and have them like kind of be a major part of our lives, because that's the only way you can actually connect with people who still grasp something of the past and like what we've lost and how things kind of should be. So it's a very precarious, unfortunate situation where you're kind of required to be involved in this thing that you know is long-term probably not healthy, but is necessary just to kind of keep the lamp burning. Because if you tried to return to like a in-person monoculture, you'd just be, you know, drinking the sewer that's, you know, running by your house.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think we're just ultimately sort of making the best out of a bad situation. So, you know, I don't feel bad for for my Twitter or the dudes I meet online or anything, but you know,
No, it's all positive. It's the net positive. Don't get me wrong, but
definitely.
It's just one of those things where you kind of realize, like, you know, while this is something that that is beneficial, you know, there's a danger here, and it would be better if we could do this other thing, but we can't. You know,
It's an ember amongst the ashes.
Indeed.
All right, cool. I guess sort of we'll tie things off here. So last thing, funny question. What are things that aren't cool anymore, Auron? Tell the Zoomers. Tell them the things that aren't cool anymore.
The things that aren't cool anymore. I remember the giant pants from the early 90s. The Jinkos and the or if you want to go even back further, like the MC Hammer pants. Like I remember people wearing those in public without any sense of irony.
Yeah, those big puffy sons of bitches. Yeah.
Yep. And then the Jinkos. Let's see what else is just horrific now. Yeah, for sure. Though it's weird, so much of that stuff is kind of rotated back in different ways. So it's hard to say what will still be uncool.
I definitely feel like skinny jeans are much cooler today than really baggy stuff. But because and the benchmark I use for this is looking at rap videos. So if you look at old or like 90s era rap videos, it was baggy. Then if you look into the early 2000s, it was really baggy. And then if you look nowadays, it's all skinny jeans. So it's odd.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, like you said, rock music unfortunately is kind of on. Has gone almost on its way out.
Not cool. It's not.
Yeah.
Cool
not cool. You'll find very few young people who listen to anything with a distorted guitar. Let's see. None of them know how to like read analog clocks. What else? Yeah, just I think general everything is disposable now. And so like the idea of like shop class or like learning how to fix something, you know, getting out with your dad and, you know, working on the car is very passé comparatively, for sure. Those are the things that come to mind right away, but
yeah. I'll add to that. Real-time strategy games are no longer cool. Nobody wants to
were, buddy. Like, we don't need to cope here. Like,
whatever, dude.
We never lived in South Korea, man. It was never cool.
I thought tons of people played Age of Empires, man.
Yeah, tons of people we hung out with.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, our real-time strategy games totally not cool anymore. Let me think other things. Adding to rock, metal is also no longer cool. I remember in 2017 I went to a metal festival in Vegas, and it was a lot of fun. But I was looking around at sort of the people who were there, and I don't recall seeing like any people who were. How old was I then when I went there? I think I was 25 when I went there at the time, and I saw nobody who was like younger than me, basically. And I was just like, and I saw lots of older people, lots of guys in their mid 30s, people in their 40s, 50s even, and I'm just like, wait, is metal becoming dad music? Because
oh yeah, it's classic rock, buddy. I remember the first time I heard Metallica on the classic rock radio station. I was just like, oh no,
oh god, it's dad rock. It's all dad rock.
Yep.
Yeah. No. So I guess that those would be the things that are uncool. Let me think. Anything else that's uncool? Books are uncool since the internet. And I remember Lambda was actually making a comment about this once on one of AA streams where he said when he was younger, he used to read a ton of books. And ever since the internet, he's just like his ability to read books has just gone down the toilet. And I thought about my own life and I was like, that is so true. Like I remember when I was younger, I would tear through books And not just, novels and stuff. I remember I'd read like Forgotten Realms and stuff. Like R.A. Salvatore, like fantasy novels, Lord of the Rings, all that sort of thing. But I also read lots of history books. I had like encyclopedias. I would read encyclopedias for fun. I got a biography of Peter the Great when I was like 13, and I read that whole thing, and being very interested by it, read The Great Divorce, Screw Tape Letters, all these books when I was young. And then ever since, like, for leisure purposes, I still read books, of course, but for leisure purposes, my ability to sort of focus in and, read books has just gone downhill since the internet.
Yeah, it's definitely something you struggle with. I had that thing where I read almost exclusively fiction until after college, and then post-college, I almost completely stopped reading fiction. So I was like that, where I would just tear through fiction books all the time when I was a kid. I'd read like, one a week, if not more sometimes. And I still read, don't get me wrong, I still read some fiction books into like my mid-20s. But now, I mean, I've reread things like Dune and Heinlein so that we could do streams on them. But I think The Road, the Cormac McCarthy book, was the only new fiction book I read at all this year. Part of that is doing the channel. Like if I'm not reading, I don't have ideas for videos. So my channel dedicated reading has pretty much become all of my reading. But even before that, that certainly, but you're right. I do have to like put myself in a scenario of like, okay, phone's across the room, TV's not on. Like I have to, if I don't physically remove myself from distractions, it's very hard.
Yeah. Twitter will be physically removed in the based republic. Yes. Yeah. Physically removed. Yeah, no, it's the same thing, man. Like I remember when I was earlier this year, I went on a weekend away with the family, and they didn't have any internet there. And so what I did when my wife and my son were like taking a nap or whatever, I just tore through books, and I was just like, I haven't felt this way in a long time. And it was because like the choice to use them was to use the gadgets was taken away from me. And ever since then, I've been like, I should unplug sometimes. It's good for you.
Well, the increased availability of audiobooks through both the library and like YouTube and stuff for free has been like a huge thing for me. Like I have never actually physically read The Open Letter or most of Mitch's Mullbug. I actually listened to all of it. I actually listened to it multiple times. I'm an audio learner anyway. I learn that way the best. And so so I've listened to an egregious amount of books on audiobook or recorded, YouTube, that kind of thing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I guess I should make an exception to that. I've always liked the materials in books, but I tended to use them in audio form. And I remember sort of before I came down here, I had a small sort of landscaping business that I had during the summers. And one of the things that all the time when I'd be out there, cutting grass or doing whatever I was doing all day, every day, I would just be listening to audiobooks. And I tore through like all of Thomas Sowell's works.
I've got a 2-hour commute, and like I'm painting a house, and you better be sure that's how I got through, Democracy of the God That Failed,
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, it's great. So I guess that, so books physical books are not cool, but audiobooks are still cool, I guess. Gosh, any more things that are uncool? I'm trying to think. Theme parks. I feel like theme parks are uncool anymore.
See, I'm a roller coaster junkie. So they'll always be cool to me because I cannot get enough of roller coasters. So
yeah. Let me think. Other things. Arcades are uncool.
Again, I deny this. I know it's true in general, but no, like
I'm just speaking for the plebs, man.
yeah. Well, I was young enough to still have the arcade experience. You know, it was kind of at the tail end, so I did a decent amount of arcade playing when I was young, and today we've got like one of those retro arcades in
Oh yeah,
you know, in the area, and so I'll travel over there and you know,
I
every
remember
once in a while.
I remember a treat for me in my small town because we didn't. The town I grew up in was small enough so it didn't have an arcade. But what it did have is it had a Pizza Hut, and that Pizza Hut had an arcade machine with all those old
The multicade, yeah.
yes, with those Neo Geo games. So it had like Metal Slug,
Yeah.
and
Final Fight,
42.
and yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I loved that thing. Like every time I'd be so stoked to go to Pizza Hut just so I could play with that arcade machine.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, cool. I guess that'll be it for things that are no longer cool. It's almost 2 a.m. over here, so my brain's
It's getting a little late.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. This has been a lot of fun listening to a couple of dudes just sort of shoot the shit, I guess. I really enjoyed this.
Back in our day,
back in our day. But it was fun. So again, if you are new to the channel and you liked what you hear and would like to hear more, please subscribe. Links to both Auron's stuff, his Twitter, his Subscribe Star, my Twitter, my Subscribe Star, all that jazz is down in the links below. So go check him out if you are not familiar with Auron's stuff. And any last words, Auron, before we close?
Just everybody go subscribe to Mr. Patriarch. Do it now. Don't think twice.
Word. Thank you very much, sir. All right, guys. Good night, and I'll see y'all later. Patriarch out.